you know, yeah, like a good idea to really see some of those things. I was, uh, yes, I was also reading about him. I jumped from one scholar to another. And of course, I mean, this one really baffled me. And he was, like I said, he was originally from Beirut. But he really baffled me because his work requires a lot, I mean, a lot of research and a lot of work. And there was no internet at the time. And specifically this book. This book requires a lot. I mean, if you were to go, let's go for al-A'lam al-Zirikli, all right, and actually see what we're talking about, al-A'lam, and we're going to go Zirikli for us to really see it. Originally, like we said, Kurdish, and let me just give you an idea of what that book looks like, okay? So the book is in 8 volumes, I believe. Yeah, it was probably in 8 volumes. Am I right? Yeah, there you go. 8 volumes, right. And what the book does, it's more of a bibliography. And it's, the bibliography and where you're taking each and every single important figure and throughout the history, of course, Muslim history. And this is what he would do. So let's take, for example, this person. Okay, we're going to take this person. So what he would do and where he would line them up in a certain order, but then this really requires a lot of work. If we're, we're looking at PhDs and we would think, hey, a PhD is a big deal. Look at this. This work that you see at the bottom, if you didn't really have a computer, you're going to be literally living within the library and putting and spending all the time just to just to locate these different figures. So if you're talking about these different figures, of course, number one, you're going to be, I guess, figuring out their time, and that's going to take some time. All right. Then you're going to be summarizing a little bit about their history. You're going to be choosing the figure. Then you're going to be number two, you're going to be stating all your references and where you got this information from. So it really takes a lot of time if you don't actually have a computer and to even find all these resources and search through all these resources in order to state page numbers, to state all this information is not easy at all. I mean, um, you're just going through each and every single one of these pages and stating, hey, where you got this information from. And there is a quote that said, Barakat al-ilm is to really attribute it to those that you had learned it from. That's the barakah of al-ilm, is that be fair and don't plagiarize things and say where you got this information from. So what took me to al-A'lam and for Zirikli, I was actually searching for Ibn al-Mundhir. And one thing is that it's not always easy to search through all of this. And then, of course, taking the time to search in some of those scholars. I think it's important because many times, as as people that would get into the study, oftentimes we don't really recognize the people themselves that made this possible, that made this information possible. And certainly when you study the different scholars, it's important to really look into these names. Who are they? Why are they of worth? What did they do? How did they live their life? This is extremely important. How did they live their life? And because you want to see what did they go through in order to do what they had done. What are some of the things? And it's quite interesting. Yes, we're doing al-Qurtubi, but speaking of al-Qurtubi, I thought it would be good. Now we're going into, I guess, just something else. And we're speaking of al-Qurtubi, I thought, well, why didn't we ever speak about al-Qurtubi and some of his life and what he went through? And I wanted to share this one, and where, yes, we talked about his name. We did talk about where he lived. We said in Cordoba, but that's not the only place that he lived in. It'd be important to see just a little bit of what the influences, the impact, the hardships that he went through. Believe it or not, the hardship that he went through was rather, I would say, interesting to me, because this scholar went through a rather a different hardship. And this hardship is that the Crusades had actually attacked their city. And when they attacked their city, they took their father, well, at least his father, their father, his brothers and sisters, and actually killed them. So he actually lived as an orphan. Just mind you, living as an orphan, at a time where definitely, the fatherly figure is not there. And certainly it was going to be a single parent taking care of the children. So it wasn't going to be easy on the mother. And certainly, there was a mother mentoring all of this. He didn't say much about his mother, but at least we would know that there were many hidden soldiers in their life that actually made them be. I guess the most important figures that I can remember spoke about their mother was really al-Bukhari and Ahmad ibn Hanbal. In Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he would always remember that his mother every single day would wake up just to let him go. His father actually had died, so she wanted to do the man role, and certainly would take her son to the masjid to pray Fajr every single day. And whenever he doesn't wake up, well, she's going to be using the stick and get him to go to the masjid and go to Fajr. All right, let's see. In where Al-Qurtubi himself, he basically stayed in Egypt for some while in Shamal Asyut, the northern part of Asyut. And like I said, in where Al-Qurtubi, what actually led him to being a scholar in tafsir, number one, is that he loved Lugha Arabiya, he loved poetry, and certainly loved the Quran and learned the Quran in the qira'at. And we could, of course, we can see the extensive research that he was doing to make al-tafsir, his tafsir, because we were seeing that he was quoting this and quoting that person, and we're speaking about a time when there was, no internet available. So he really had to research those books in order to get this information. And it wasn't something that you would necessarily memorize. You would have to really research. It wasn't something that you were going to bring from your own mind. And he was definitely a person that was attributing those ideas that he had learned to the scholars. So he would come in and say, Abu Ishaq said this, Ibn al-Mundar said this, Shafi'i said this, and here's the response about this, and this is what I think. So Al-Qurtubi is actually a scholar in where he was a fair scholar. He was a scholar that was attributing the ilm to the ulama, and he was a scholar that was doing extensive research. Now, that's a scholar you really want to connect with, a person that does extensive research, and not a person. It's so easy. It's so easy to speak in motivational speeches. It's extremely easy. I mean, you're finding during our time people like Stephen Harvey, people who might, they're, well, their struggle or even their successes, or are simply that she basically one day wanted to be a singer, and later on she became a singer. She was actually working in some place and all of that, and she became a singer, and people would see her, she was basically, hey, struggling with this. Or this person was, I don't know, selling old bread in the streets of this country, and then later on, of course, started working hard and training for boxing and became a boxer or whatever it is. So when you're looking at all of that, of course, you're seeing, well, what actually makes the ilm, the ulama, what effort did they put to put in the ilm that we have today? And that's what I really wanted to, I guess, see in where what he did was work in and do pottery. So look at that. He actually learned how to do pottery, and pottery was basically the job that he was doing in his, I guess, youth time. And that was basically what was common at the time. So I want you to keep that in mind in where, if you were to look at a number of different scholars, if you're looking at al-Jassas, he basically learned how not pottery, but al-Jassas was basically it was a type of where you're doing decorations on the wall. On the walls, you're doing decorations on the walls to kind of give them a certain shape. And it wasn't just him, but you're talking about a number of different scholars. They actually started out with working perhaps, like we said, pottery, other ones probably a blacksmith. Al-Albani was a watchmaker, and he would fix watches and make watches. So it's really important to recognize that giving your children, and of course teaching them certain things even in their early childhood, teaching them how to do certain, let's just call it handcraft, because it teaches them sabr. You know, that's the alternative to the gaming, is basically learning a certain handcraft, whether we're speaking about, like we said, pottery, or whether we're speaking about perhaps building something, maybe robotics, whatever it is, I mean, where it's really a training to get them into recognizing that what it takes to, one, appreciate time, what it takes to put in patience, what it takes to actually invest in where you're going to see your hands do it. You're going to see with that hands on, you're going to see that it's an investment, it's patience, and then you're going to see the outcome later on. And certainly, of course, he lived in Al-Andalus, but I want you to look at the date right there, and where 633 certainly was considered the golden era for knowledge, for education, but it was still a time where the Spaniards were still, of course, carrying multiple and many invasions on the Muslims in Spain. And then, of course, later on, I want you to keep in mind, by the way, during this era, in when we're speaking about Spain, or Andalus, we would just think of it as just an area where there's only ilm and people are just learning. That's not actually 100% true. If you were to go back to Ibn Hazm, I guess Ibn Hazm was perhaps the most important person that we can, I guess, through his books, really see what the society was looking like. And the reason why Ibn Hazm was the son of a minister. So he was living in a castle. He really was considered a person that was okay living in a castle at one point, but later on, he didn't actually stay living in a castle. Later on, he had to face a huge opposition for, let's just call it, ardent writing and ardent, I guess, disagreements with the other madhab. So they burnt down all his books. That's Ibn Hazm. But one thing that really stands out in the writings of Ibn Hazm is when he would talk about Al-Andalus, in where there was a lot of fitna there. There was a lot of, let's just call it boyfriend, girlfriend, not to the level of perhaps zina, or who knows if there was, but there was a lot of these intermingling, and certainly the presence of concubines was bringing in a lot of fitna. Why? Because one, They didn't necessarily wear hijab because they were not obligated to wear hijab. And certainly were, many of them were sold based on, hey, it was their beauty that was giving them the price, I guess, and they were in abundant numbers because in Andalus, hey, it was considered an upper class society. An upper class society is basically going to afford bringing in the different concubines. A lot of these concubines were actually sold not by Muslims, believe it or not, but they were actually sold by non-Muslims, and then later on the Muslims would buy them and ship them over. A lot of them were coming from Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and of course, certainly at the time, Afghanistan. So you're talking about those areas, and most of them were sold by the non-Muslims. The Muslims would buy them and bring them over. And of course, in order to increase their price, they would be educated, and the ones that were basically let's say the most expensive are the educated concubines, and then later those educated concubines would basically be the ones to write poetry, were the ones to basically be the special tutors, the ones to do the scribing. And I came across one time, oh, I, I know I know it's easy to find, but I don't want to search for it right now. Anyhow, so this woman was actually writing a manuscript, okay? This woman was writing a manuscript, and at the end of the manuscript, remember, at the time, they didn't have printing companies. So if you wanted to get a book, you would basically have to either pay someone to write the whole book, or you were going to write it yourself. So this woman wrote the book and scribed the book, and at the end of the book, it was the last page in that manuscript, and she said, "Please excuse me for the typos, or at least, well, they're not typos, but for the poor handwriting, I guess, or sometimes in where saqt al-harf, which would be, I guess a typo, in where a misspelling, for example, or something like that. It's because I would be writing with one hand and shaking my son's cradle with another." Look at that. She's shaking her son's cradle with another and writing with one hand. So, of course, to keep him quiet, in order for you to find a time, she would basically be, shaking, whether it's shaking the cradle with her hand or with her feet at the end. The lines are going to be, of course, squiggly lines, and they're not going to be at their best, So just see that. And where Qurtuba, yes, it did contain a lot of ilm, but you had to really choose your path amongst all of this, because there was a lot of fasad as well. There was a lot of fitna as well. There were a lot of Jews as well, the Sfaradi Jews that lived in Cordoba. They actually had their own neighborhoods because they liked living in ghettos and liked to live in their own neighborhoods. We did actually have a couple scholars that had converted from Judaism to Islam, and even wrote and started writing, I guess, some of that ilm as well. So um, just to keep in mind, and where I guess one person I can think of writing their poetry had I guess, a history of Judaism, and Abu Ishaq al-Ibiri, in where writing poetry in beautiful Lugha Arabiya, but of course it's a lens, it's that light doorway for us to see what was Qurtuba or what was Andalus really like at the time. Yes, there was a lot of ilm, but there was a lot of fitna as well for those that basically wanted to fitna. And just to keep that in mind. So to actually think that, yeah, well, he was actually in an area where it was just all ilm and nobody cared about fitna is not actually necessarily true. So even their mother had to put in a lot of single parenting skills in order to make sure that her children were basically becoming the scholars and getting the education that was necessary. But one thing about al-Qurtubi, what was keeping him and giving him the ilm, this is important. It's not enough to get the knowledge, but the barakah of the knowledge, the ilm, for it to really stay within your mind, you really needed to get into az-zuhd and al-wara'. What's the difference between az-zuhd and al-wara'? Az-zuhd is, okay, translated as asceticism, but zuhd is more in where you may have the money. So zuhd is not necessarily to be and live in poverty, but zuhd is more in where the person is not concerned about entertainment, not concerned about wealth, not concerned about dunya. They could have the money, but they're not using that money for, let's just say, for dunya purposes. They're using that money to basically help towards their akhirah. All right, so that's a zuhd, in where they're not living, always trying to, hey, I need this sweet dish to be with me. You could look at their pantry and it's all full of, I guess, all these different things in their pantry, and that is a problem because when you want to know the life of how a person would live, you would want to see their pantry. How much is their pantry filled with food and these snacks? Or even look at their closet. How many attires do they have within that closet? Look at their garage. How many cars? What type of cars, etc. All these different things. It's not wrong to have a good car. This is not wrong. But we're just saying right there, how much are you investing for your dunya? How much are you really wanting dunya compared to akhirah? Il-wara' is different. Il-wara' is really to hold on to the principle of the Lord Almighty despite the, let's call it, the different challenges out there. You could be challenged maybe to lose your job, but you're basically holding on that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a razaq. So you're not worried about saying the truth, because to you, the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what is of your concern. So that's al-wara'. Al-wara' is to stick to the principles of the Lord Almighty, despite the challenges, despite the fear, despite, I guess, the hardships that you might go through. All right. And of course, that's why when you look at the different scholars, like Ibn Farhun al-Maliki, he's a Maliki scholar. And let's look at how he had described him. He said, and he was from the pious servants of the Lord Almighty, and he was from the scholars that al-arifin al-wari'in. I want to look at this one. You can have scholars, all right, that are not necessarily committed to wara'. You can have a lot of scholars that might actually be scholars that have the knowledge, but not necessarily the practice. There was a scholar, two scholars that actually come to mind. One is Ibn al-Qassab. That one was really baffling me. A scholar in usul, and that this scholar, it was said that he did not pray. That baffles me. Now, I don't know if that's true, because another scholar, his name is al-Amidi. Now, al-Amidi, he was a scholar of usul. Maybe we could just see something here in where al-Amidi, he was a scholar of usul, and we're speaking about a major, I would say, genius work in writing al-Ihkam and fi usul al-Ahkam. In where, let me, I guess, show you in where this book, in where for al-Amidi, in where al-Ihkam fi usul al-Ahkam, and of course it's really hard to read, and it really needs a lot of focus. But it was claimed, and I was going through some of those that wrote about al-Amidi, and they started saying that he doesn't even pray. And you start wondering, is that even true that he doesn't even pray? But here's one thing, is that you want to keep in mind that some scholars, or yes, even if they're scholars, they're normal human people and they're just normal people, but they can actually say certain things or expect or suspect certain things, and then they can make those mistakes. I'm not talking about al-Amidi now. Now, here's the defense for al-Amidi. The scholars that supported al-Amidi, the scholars that lived with al-Amidi, they said that that was not at all true, and that that was a claim that they had actually done in about al-Amidi, that he doesn't pray, because there was an incident where they basically put some ink on his foot to see whether it was going to be erased or not. And therefore, they basically didn't see it, that it got erased the second day. So they said, well, if it didn't get erased, that means he didn't make wudu, and therefore he doesn't pray. They didn't say, well, maybe he was up all night writing. And that's the thing. You'll have certain people that will envy you. You will have certain people that will bring about such claims, and then they'll make it, I guess, be something that is public, not because it's true, but because those people are basically people that others are willing to listen to. So not every single claim you would necessarily want to listen to. And I'm not here saying that al-Amidi wasn't a alim, arif, and wara. But I'm just saying that we really need to be careful in when you would find some, let's say, accusations about certain scholars that they didn't pray, or that they didn't, just like Ibn al-Qasab, they had said that he didn't pray, but is that necessarily true? We don't really know those intricate details, and we really have to be really careful. Same thing when you look at Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, in where Ibn al-Athir had actually said that Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, he called them Majin. Majin is kind of like saying a womanizer, a person that was obsessed with music, entertainment, and all of that. Well, you would see al-Qadi al-Fadil, who was his, I guess, personal scriber. He was a judge, he was his personal scriber, and how he was describing him in Tarikh al-Rawdatain, in where he was describing him as a person that was concerned about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was a person of dhikr, he was a person of ibadah, he was a person of zuhd. So and he was knowing how he actually lived at close relations, because he was with him all along. And he even moved with him when he was as a young child, getting the training from his own uncle Shirkuh. And I know the names sound different. Those names are actually Kurdish, so they don't sound like Abdullah, and they're actually Kurdish. All right. And so was Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. He himself was actually Kurdish. All right. And even al-Qadi al-Fadil was scribing for him. Al-Qadi al-Fadil was joining along with him when he was in Mosul, in Iraq, and later on in Dimashq, in Damascus, and later on moved, of course, to Egypt. So Qadi al-Fadl was all along with him, and you could see that those that had, I guess, some form of, let's say, political disagreements would sometimes raise some suspicion about some scholars' deen, or some scholars' I guess, conviction, and they would write it down. So when you look at this piece of it, I think it's important, because if Ibn Farhun, of course, Maliki madhab, and he said, al-ulama al-arifin al-wari'in, there he was a scholar that knew and had the ilm and had basically the polymath right there, and even applied it, had the conviction for his deen, and az-zahidina fi dunya, and was always leaving dunya and not necessarily running after it, and المشغولين بما يعنيهم من أمور الآخرة. I want you to look at this one. And he said he was always busy with what would take him to basically success in the hereafter. Now, that's a key thing in order for us to grow in our deen, this is key in where we have to get ourselves busy with what leads us to Jannah. There's no way that you can be a person that is basically busy with talking about people or busy with trying to follow those reels and at the same time have the time to actually get ilm. Getting ilm requires a lot of effort. Getting ilm requires a lot of energy invested in where what that means, you're going to make sure that you channel your energy towards what actually matters. And when you, of course, look at al-Qurtubi's books, you could see, of course, we're only on the 8th volume, and look at how much time we had spent just in Surah al-Maida. We're already on the 46th, the 45th or 46th, 46, or what was it? Yeah, anyhow, just Surah al-Maida. All right. And we're not even scribing here. We're just talking. And look at how much time we're spending each and every single day. I mean, I wish you were with me, even when I'm taking the time to research and study and all of that. And but subhanAllah, the amount of time that it takes to research and study is definitely a lot more than the amount of time you would spend in, I guess, delivering what you had, part of what you had learned. All right. And of course, certainly when you look at some of the things that would display, I guess, his wara and his zuhd, I guess, his asceticism and his consideration for akhirah is where when he had actually written 2 books. The first one is قمح الحرص بالزهد والقناعة, in where you're suppressing your, I guess, your commitment for dunya with one thing. In other words, what are you suppressing it with? Well, you're trying, instead of having that conviction for dunya, you're actually letting go. You're keeping yourself basically not busy in collecting dunya, but you're basically letting that satisfaction with the least amount be your place of focus, and not, in other words, survival in order to continue making it for the akhirah. The other book is التذكرة في أحوال الموتى وأمور الآخرة. The other book is basically in where it's a reminder. So how did he manage to make such book possible? And how did he manage to live his zuhud? Well, he was always in التذكرة, just a reminder of the situations, the status, and what happens to those that had died, and even the different stations in al-akhirah, in the hereafter. And certainly you could see that he was always writing about dhamm al-ghina. That actually takes me to another scholar, Ibn al-Jawzi. Ibn al-Jawzi, this is really strange, okay? Ibn al-Jawzi, he actually wrote perhaps the most important books about zuhd. One thing that stands out is that this person really, really hated women. Ladies, this is weird. But in every single time he would even talk about polygamy, he'd be like, hey, this person got married to 2 wives, and he got married to a young woman, vibrant and beautiful. He got married at the end. He died at the end. Yeah, didn't live long, etc. It was always the same story, where, hey, if you're gonna get married and you're gonna get into this dunya, you gotta be really careful. These women will just take you to death. It was really funny. Sometimes I would see, it's like, I don't know how men see this, but it's really quite interesting in where Ibn al-Jawzi had really seen that women are not only I guess, ropes for shaitan, even though that's a biblical statement, I guess. But he really felt that women are going to be a place if, yes, okay, you're making family, but women are going to basically get you out of your focus, get you into some form of entertainment and basically تشغلك عن الآخرة, get you busy away from الآخرة. That's basically how he had seen it. I mean, is that necessarily how all of them had seen it? The answer is no, because hey, in Nasa'i wasn't like that. In Nasa'i was actually a very polygamous man. And he was also doing great work in his studies, so he doesn't basically agree with him, I guess. But anyhow, that's a different thing. We're going a little bit off, but let's see right there in where um, al-Qurtubi, it's very important. Remember when we said when it comes to living Islam, we said you have to know, you have to have that justice. You have to basically live at some form of patience. And number three, some form of satisfaction. And number four, that's what would only and only if you were to really invest in those areas, that's what was going to get you into the strength of having the ability to be courageous, to defend truth. All right. And of course, that's what you would see. Remember when we talked about Spain or Andalus, and we said how Spain wasn't, or Andalus wasn't necessarily a place in where it's all, a people, faith, and all of that. We said no. You had others that would also, I guess, challenge your faith, challenge your commitment, challenge even when you wanted to let the dalil be your madhab, the evidence to basically lead you to what you would find is more authentic. You had others that would challenge you. No, you had to follow this madhab, or else we're going to be basically starting to bring about suspicious things, and I guess letting people be away from you, and somehow raising some suspicion about you, and accusing your deen, accusing your knowledge, accusing you of this, in where what we're trying to do, or what they were trying to do, was really keep them away from uh, from um, um, keeping their commitment to al-haq. And you could see in where al-Qurtubi himself, speaking of which, he said this is the age when most of the deviants had actually been in power over good. And that's when even the servants had basically overcome the free within the society. And of course, they had sold the rulings, and many of those that were in power were actually wanting some form of, I guess, changing the rules, changing the principles in order to suit their interest. And he said, ruling, but it's basically becoming something that you would pay for. You pay the scholar in order for the scholar to basically give you the fatwa that suits your interest, your political interest. So therefore, it was basically becoming something that people were selling, and not necessarily trying to find guidance in. So it was, of course, this is what you found, but of course, al-Qurtubi was not accepting that. And he said, of course, majority were changing the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, changing the rulings, and they would be wanting to listen to fake news and fake lies, and basically just because they wanted to use and abuse their positions in order to get to certain interests, and it was basically prevalent right there. But of course, al-Qurtubi, he was a very simple person, to the point that he would only walk in really the same garment all the time. It was his own taylasan, I guess, his own thawb. He didn't have too many, but he definitely had all that perseverance in where commitment in order to seek ilm. So he was always just researching, always writing, and certainly without even getting bored, because that was what he was enjoying. And of course, it's important to mention that he had to leave Cordoba, had to leave Al-Andalus, and actually uh, go for Egypt and learn from the scholars there. But it's really important to keep in mind that it's not easy uh, to to just leave a country that you're used to. And of course, Al-Qurtubi always had that amana. Al-Qurtubi, what is the amana in where he always wanted to make sure that he was not doing any form of plagiarism. So what he would do is that his condition, he said, وشرط في هذا الكتاب إضافة الأقوال إلى قائلها والأحاديث إلى مصنفيها فإنه يقال من بركة العلم أن يضاف إلى قائله. He said the condition in where in his tafsir, he said in his introduction, in where the condition that he put within the tafsir is that he would basically attribute every single quote to the scholars that had mentioned this, or even the hadith themselves, in where he would attribute it to whoever narrated those hadith, because, and he right there, this is supposed to be a semicolon right there, because it is said that the barakah, the blessings of al-ilm, in where you would attribute, in other words, don't fall in plagiarism, and you would have to really attribute that ilm to really who invested the effort in thinking about it, or invested the effort and had basically a sabq, or had basically expedited, or even raised, or even was the first to do this effort and find this work, and don't necessarily attribute it to yourself like you're the one that did it. And this is so common. This is so common to actually see. I mean, I know it, my husband's books, I would see many times in where he would write a book, and then later on, you would see others actually taking PhDs and master's degree, when you would see that they had literally just taken page after page, word after word, and literally plagiarized the whole book and basically presented it like it was their work. I see it all the time, where someone would take someone else's effort and actually get degrees on it when they don't even attribute the work to whoever really invested the effort at the end. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one that basically is going to rule in all of this. But of course, you will see that whoever does that plagiarism, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not put the barakah in their work, will not put the barakah in, of course, certainly um, in their efforts, even in the akhirah. And of course, you could, I'm not going to continue just, there's really a lot to say about Al-Qurtubi, but I guess one thing that, just going to go over it really quick, and where he had multiple scholars, and this is extremely important. Even Abu al-Abbas al-Qurtubi right there, he was a scholar of hadith, and he actually wrote Al-Mufhim fi Sharh Sahih Muslim. One of my professors, she actually did her PhD dissertation in one of the chapters in Al-Mufham fi Sharh Sahih Muslim, and it was Kitab al-Libas. That was Dr. Maryam Saleh. Um, and anyhow, so this book itself for Abu al-Abbas al-Qurtubi is almost in perhaps 20 volumes, but it really reflects that he had great ilm. And this is extremely important to keep in mind, in where if you really want ilm, you really got to go for those scholars that are presenting the resources, and not necessarily those scholars that are speaking in motivational speeches. Motivational speeches, those are important, there's no doubt, but that's more for the beginners in talab al-ilm. the beginners that are trying, I guess, to find their way. The motivational speeches and all of those are more for their early stages, those that are trying to find their path away from dunya and finding it into Islam and finding it. They're still, I guess, out there. But the ones that are deeper in ilm, you really have to, and those that want to go up the ladder in ilm, you really have to learn how to go to the resources, and you got to find those scholars that would lead you to the resources in order for you not to, let's say, take those fast foods. Think of the ilm as food. All right. You're not looking for fast foods in where, like the motivational speakers. No, you're looking for the scholars that would teach you how to use those ingredients. And then later on, you would be the one to basically bring about a new recipe. That's the scholars, and that's the scholar that we would want to see. And it definitely takes a lot of patience. It's not easy to invest in those not easy to invest in those students, and it's not easy to find these students that look for, I guess, the resources and not necessarily still wondering whether hijab is something that suits them or not. Those are still, I guess, within al-mu'allafati qulubihim stage. Okay. Even when we're talking about Islam, if somebody is still wondering whether hijab is for them or not, they're still struggling with their salah, etc. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them hidayah. But if you're really wanting to go up in ilm, there's no way that if you're struggling with your hijab and you're struggling with your salah and you're struggling with key things in Islam, there's no way that you're going to be really working working in that if you're still right there confused about yourself. If we're talking about a stage of talab al-ilm, no, that you have to really be grounded in your deen. How do I get grounded in my deen? You have to get grounded in your deen in where شكوت إلى وكيع سوء حفظي فأرشدني إلى ترك المعاصي وأخبرني بأن العلم نور ونور الله لا يهدى لعاصي. How do I actually work on that? So right there, you said, shakawtu, I had complained to Wakia. Scholars had differences of opinions on whether that is a Shafi'i, and they said, no, Wakia is a scholar that basically was not a sheikh for a Shafi'i. Anyhow, at the end, the theme, I had complained to Wakia that I had a poor memory in learning the ilm and keeping track of knowledge. So he guided me to leaving sin and told me that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge is light, and this light can never be gifted to a person of sin. So if you're struggling with simple things about Islam, let's call it kindergarten level in Islam, and you are actually wanting to be a alim right there, you still got to master your kindergarten level first. So what should I do? Change your environment, change your friends. You got to do that. Change your friends. 2, you got to change the lifestyle. How much time are you spending in, I guess, watching TV or even perhaps entertainment, YouTube, or spending in talking, or spending in, I guess, over the phone or whatever? How much time are you spending in all the different things in entertainment? How much time are you spending in shopping? How much time are you, I guess, watching movies? Did you actually think that you had to watch movies? There's no way that you can have the love for dunya and the love for akhirah come together. There's no way. ما جعل الله لرجل من قلبين في جوفه. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not create anybody with 2 hearts. There's no way. And that's the same thing. And where if the person is as a kindergarten level, we really need to work our way up first. How? By changing your environment, looking at the time, how much you're spending, and certainly letting go of sin. That's going to help you. Letting go of sin, that's going to be key. Why? Because sin is a spiritual denouncer. Sin is a distractor. it becomes so dear to your heart that it distracts you away from focusing on ilm. Spiritual elevators, those are basically the commitments that you would invest in your deen. Once you're committed in your deen, you're going to see that you're capable of taking away all those distracting elements or those distracting things, and you're going to be seeing your eyes right there focused in seeing the light. This ilm is light. There's no way to actually mix light with darkness. There's no way. Light eliminates darkness. And of course, same thing, in order for you to be able to see the light and put in this amount of effort in seeking ilm, you want to be a alima, you got to take away the distractions. You got to change your friends. You got to change the society that you're living in. You got to change what you're watching. You got to, you know what? Even change the scholars that you're probably motivational speakers, etc. Sometimes you got to I guess, review. Well, which scholars are you listening to? Are you listening to more motivational speakers, or are you really looking and listening to, yes, let me call them the boring scholars. The boring scholars are usually the true scholars. You know why? Because usually people that are motivational speakers, yes, they usually speak in emotion. They have a way of speaking to your heart, to your mind. Those are needed. Those people, we really need these people. They know how to speak to people's hearts. They know how to speak to people's minds. And who are these types of people? These types of people are the type of, or at least the people that need these motivational speakers, let's call them that way, those dua, are really the ones that are, I guess, living in other types of emotions. So you need these motivational speakers that would basically be right there. Think of a coach. Okay, the coach is going to be every single time that somebody's distracted, the coach is going to be there and basically hustle, move it, come on, move, and basically giving you this kind of motivation in this kind of, I guess, shaking you in order to get you on track. We need these people. But once you get into the actual training doesn't require a lot of impulsivity, a lot of emotions. It requires a lot of brain focus. And you cannot have good focus if you are panicking. And this is extremely important. That's why I'm saying the boring scholars are actually the real scholars you're looking for. Those scholars that are taking mind-to-mind education. They're not working on your emotions, but they're actually working in expanding your mind, in expanding your ability to research. The ones that would be basically working on your emotions are basically the ones, those are for the ones that are still needing to train. Hey, work out, move. No, that's where you could see in where al-Qurtubi himself, whether we're speaking about these scholars, and you could see whether one of them is Maliki, the other one is Shafi'i, the third one is Maliki as well, you could see. And of course, he had more shuyukh, but those were, I guess, the most important ones. And it's really important to remember in where even from different places, this one was Egyptian, and this one was from Alexandria, Egypt as well. But you could see in where al-Qurtubi was from Qurtuba, of course, al-Andalus, you could see that he basically had different teachers in different fields. And here's one thing that stands out. This is a scholar of hadith. And this one is a scholar of hadith as well. Scholars of hadith are usually the scholars that work at the back end. They're usually the scholars that no one knows because they work at the back end. And You know, I was capable of take me to any Islamic studies department, and just by the way they walk, you would be capable of knowing which professor is a professor of tafsir, which one is a professor of fiqh, which one is a professor of hadith, just by the way they walk. Wallahi al-azim. You could see a professor that's walking with this, let's call it al-huwaina. They would be walking with these steps in where it's calm footsteps. They would be walking with steps in where there's serenity in it. Those are professors of hadith. The light of hadith reflected on them, and you could see that their inshighal, their work in hadith, it basically reflected on even their footsteps and how they walk and how they talk. When they speak, they're speaking in calmness. Same thing. Al-Mufassirin, same thing. They're very smart and they're speaking in that light. But a scholar in fiqh, you would see when they speak, you would see that there's some form of hiddah. There's some form, what is al-hiddah in English? Al-hiddah in where there's some form of the person being punctual, a person being, I guess, some wanting to be some form of, I don't know how to describe this, but I guess they're really, they're really, I guess, powerful, maybe. You could see strength. You could see even when they're walking, their footsteps, they're really pressing hard on their footsteps and not necessarily being easy. You could see that a lot of times they can be very argumentative. And when they're very argumentative, that makes them lose a lot of friends, by the way, because they have, I guess, that reflection from fiqh in where I've got my evidence and I'm going to support the evidence, and here's why your evidence is wrong, and here's where you got this basically misunderstood. And of course their relationship with people and people's problems also gets them, I guess, sometimes become sometimes very hard to deal with. Guess what? My main specialty is fiqh. That's supposed to be good news or bad news? I have no idea. My family sometimes says that they could see this, I guess, this hard personality. That's what they're claiming. That's not actually true. Speaking of the ayah, وَلَا تُزَكُّوا أَنفُسَكُمْ هُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِمَنِ اتَّقَى. I'm just, just taking you out of the that toughness, let's say it that way. All right. So another thing to say, we could see another scholar, and where changing scholars is extremely important, and not sticking to one type of scholar is, or even one type of madhab is also important, because the more scholars you would change, and here's one thing, is that scholars will repeat a lot of what they say. They'll forget that they had repeated this because it's on their mind, and they'll repeat it, and you'll be like, yeah, I know what they're going to say. And then they'll repeat it on and on again, many, many times. So that's why sometimes you really have to recognize when it's time to graduate from that scholar and move on to another scholar. So you could see in where he had learned from Ibn al-Jumayzi, in where one of the scholars of hadith, fiqh, and qira'at. I want to look at this one. A scholar in hadith, fiqh, and even the different qira'at. And certainly you could see that al-Qurtubi was also obsessed with different qira'at, because he recognizes the influence of qira'at and the knowledge in those qira'at, or at least the variant readings, in understanding the Quran and tafsir. So just, keeping that in mind, and where, let's see, this one is actually Dimashqi, from Damascus. And just seeing those variant scholars, and of course the students at the end. You'll have some students that will carry on the legacy, and other students, they just want to learn and just use it and get a job with that. at the time and don't really necessarily want to keep that legacy and in that ilm and carry on that legacy after they had learned. But other students that know. I basically am here looking for the main ingredients, the resources, because they would say and recognize that no matter how scholarly the teacher was, the teacher is basically not necessarily infallible. The teacher, the students will also be critical and will recognize that their teachers also have faults. So what they would want to do is basically go farther than their teacher's legacy. It's, hey, وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. In that, we should basically compete. We're competing for the akhirah. So to compete with the teacher, to compete with the professor, to compete, of course, with your teacher, it's not an issue of, not at all, of any form of animosity. This competition is a positive competition. It's a competition for the akhirah. It's a competition for, hey, this is what my teacher was capable of presenting. I want to get to the resources and I would like to present more. I would like to go farther. I would like to continue their legacy and actually go farther in delivering the ilm and even bring about more solutions to the different challenges that our society is facing. And of course, when you're looking at any scholar to know whether they really presented ilm or whether they were more of, let's call it motivational speakers, their books are going to be revealing the extensive research that they were investing in. And that's where you would see Al-Jami' al-Ahkam al-Quran, in where Qurtubi's book, the book that we're basically doing, of course, Sharh for, although 21 volumes. So we're still on the 8th, but we won't give up, inshallah. And you could see those different books that he had basically written. Look at this one, Al-Asna fi Sharh Asma' Allah al-Husna wa Sifatihi al-Ula or al-Ulya. In where al-Asna is like saying the highest level, in where explaining the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the beautiful names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And let's see this one, in where that's really rather interesting, in where what he was doing, not only in fiqh and in tafsir, but he was also doing al-i'lam bima fi din al-nasara min al-mafasid wal-awham. وإظهار محاسن دين الإسلام. It is to inform basically of what Christianity had in terms of discrepancies and even confusions, and displaying what Islam has, of course, for the world and for the good things about Islam. So you could see right there in where, what did al-Qurtubi really want to do? Well, he wasn't just in tafsir, but he was also in religious studies, also in, let's call it interfaith studies, even though interfaith is something else, but different religious studies. And you could see in where he was also in tazkiyah as well. Of course, just be aware of, what that zuhud, that qana'a, that satisfaction, that love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how far it would take the person. I'm not going to talk about Tafsir al-Qurtubi because we actually had seen Tafsir al-Qurtubi ourselves and how extensive it is, but it's important to see sometimes the scholars and what they had said about him. Al-Dhahabi basically 7th century scholar, he had basically said he had a number of different books that he had written, تدل على كثرة اطلاعه ووفور فضله, which basically reflects on his extensive research and I guess how much of his al-fadl, in other words, the blessings, the good things that he was presenting. And of course, he said in his tafsir, he basically had worked the work of pioneers, and it is complete in its real meaning. In other words, he's defining it as a really complete masterpiece, let's say it that way. And he said he also has a book about Asma Allah al-Husna, the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and certainly just mentioning those parts. In where, let's see, Ibn Farhun, he's Maliki madhab, now very important Maliki madhab scholar. He said, and his tafsir is one of the best tafsir, one of the best books on Quranic exegesis, in where he eliminated and removed the different stories and the different things that were mentioned about history. And he had basically, instead of that, alternated it with mentioning the different rulings in Al-Quran and deriving the different evidences, and would even mention the different qira'at, the variant readings, and even, of course, the place of semantics and talking about semantics and grammar, and even the abrogated ayat and with those details. So just mentioning those areas in where Al-Qurtubi lived in, later on when he had died, he was living in Sa'id in Egypt, and that's where he had actually died. Basically, his grave is in Al-Minya, east of the Nile River, died 671 Hijriya. So this is just, I guess, one side, and where I know it's we kind of passed the time, but wanted to share that one about him. Let's see, right there, and where, of course, with the ayat, we constantly would quote, or at least Al-Qurtubi would constantly quote from Ibn al-Mundhir. I thought it would be important to actually go for Ibn al-Mundhir and learn about Ibn al-Mundhir, because when you're learning about Ibn al-Mundhir, and the reason why I actually wanted to take you to Ibn al-Mundhir was for us to basically learn one very important thing, which is, let's look at for Ibn al-Mundhir. I basically prepared it right there. Here we go. I want you to look at this one, and the person that I am quoting from is, remember the person, let's say I'm going to show you, again, I'm going to take you there, in where I'm taking you to this Kurdish / Lebanese scholar, Al-A'lam Lizirikli. So I'm basically quoting from Zirikli. Remember Zirikli? We were both basically quoting him before. Let's see, we definitely, at least, Khairuddin Zirikli, Zirikli. Okay, let's see it right there, so we could remember this is him. All right, so let's see. And by the way, can you imagine? He was actually set up for execution by the French, but subhanAllah, later, I guess the Saudi king had actually intervened and saved him. Anyhow, so this is Ibn al-Mundhir. You could see he lived in 242 Hijriya and 319 Hijriya, so not necessarily too long. All right, his name is Muhammad ibn Ibrahim ibn al-Mundhir al-Naysaburi. When we're talking about Naysabur, we're talking about Iran today. His name or nickname Abu Bakr. He was faqih, mujtahid. He was a scholar of fiqh, and he went even farther than that, in where, let's look at this one. This is really important, in where Ibn al-Mundhir, he was the Shaykh for al-Haram in Mecca. And the Dhahabi said about him, Dhahabi is basically the scholar that we quoted earlier. He said Ibn al-Mundhir had basically written a number of different books, in where no one had ever written any books like it, in where, whether we're speaking about fiqh or whether we're speaking about al-Awsat. You see this al-Awsat, it's actually in 15 volumes, and where what it's all about is basically going back to the variant opinions between scholars, and then And then he would basically mention where scholars had unanimous agreements or where they had differences of opinions. And that is true ilm, is when you're capable of researching the differences of opinions between scholars and you're capable of recognizing the borders. Because if you know that there are different opinions between scholars on this point, point A or point B, then you know your boundaries. And when you know your boundaries, you're capable of recognizing, of course, the boundaries of where Islam's parameters are at and recognizing the scholars and what they had derived. And when you basically go back to those, let's say, those books that contain the research, that's what actually brings about something that's very important. Let's look at Ibn al-Mundhir. What madhab was he? All right, this is important. What madhab was Ibn al-Mundhir? Guess what? He was of no madhab. Well, how was he of no madhab? He was of no madhab because simply he had went beyond the level of madhabization. What does that mean? He basically, and the other scholars would actually explain, sorry, but the other page doesn't want to open. Maybe we could actually go like this.
I like that word.
Exactly, madhabization. Exactly. It's trying to, I guess, use an English term for the word madhab, because the word madhab actually means, I guess, a direction, basically means a path that you're taking. So madhabization is, I guess, it's not an English word, but of course, it's basically speaking of those that would attribute themselves to a particular school. So Ibn al-Mundhir decided that he didn't want to attribute himself to a particular school because his research was actually farther than considering that it is one school that determines truth, but he considered that it was supposed to be the evidence that guides you to what is actually considered as truth. So it's not a scholar or a particular school that guides you to truth. It's actually the evidence that guides you to truth. Now, this is really important. In other words, that madhab idea, that madhab mentality was by Ibn al-Mundhir was actually seen that that's more for the younger students. That's more for the students that basically had, let's see, look at this one. Let's look at this one. Here it is. Finally, that other page, and what we're using is, so you can see it, al-A'lam lil-Zirikli, for the guy that we were this guy we were talking about. We're going back to his book, and this website actually does it for us, in where I don't have to download the PDF for his book. The book is available and you can actually get it right there. Okay, so we're still out with Ibn al-Mundhir. Let's see, footnote number 1. This is what he said. He quoted from تذكرة الحفاظ and والوفيات, of course, طبقات الشافعية, لسان الميزان. And of course, you're looking at volume 5, page number 27, volume 2, page 126. Okay. And then he said, and there was some research on that his death year was 310 year Hijriya. And in Siyar A'lam al-Nubala, he said he basically, here, this kha, meaning he was classified as a طبقة الثامنة عشرة, and it was classified basically on الذهبي. He's the one that wrote سير أعلام النبلاء. And quote, he said, لم يكن يتقيد بمذهب بل يدور مع ظهور الدليل وما يتقيد بمذهب واحد إلا من هو قاصر في التمكن في العلم كأكثر علماء زماننا أو من هو متعصب. يا سلام عليك. Look at what he said. Quote, he said the only ones that would stick to a particular madhab, or basically, of course, he was not, Ibn al-Mundhir was not sticking to a particular madhab. He said he would actually let the evidence be his guide to what is supposed to be the preponderant ruling, basically. And he said he would not stick to one particular madhab because he believed that the only person that would stick to one particular madhab is basically a person that was weak in their ability to research in science and research in knowledge. So that's the case with most of the scholars during our time, or a person that is fanatic about one particular opinion and not necessarily recognizing that it's not necessarily the madhab that leads the way, but it's actually the evidence that leads the way. So he was basically saying that the only ones that would stick to the madhab are really the ones that did not have, I guess, wide research or even the knowledge or the capacity to search and research furthermore. Now that's a mic drop right there. Right? That's a mic drop. I think enough said when we're actually talking about that. And when you're speaking about, of course, a scholar like that, and there's really a lot to say. And what did they actually do in researching? I guess scholars. I know we're talking about researching scholars. We did talk about some of those scholars that actually did some bibliographies to research scholars, but I think a very important person during our time that really deserves there is this one there is this book in where it is actually perhaps a book. You could see it's a huge book right there. Guess what this is about? This book is about bibliographies from a different kind, not people, but books, sciences. So he will talk about, for example, the science of chemistry, and he'll talk about the most important scholars that wrote in chemistry, and then we'll talk about their books and talk about what fields were studied in that and so forth. But there's one person, of course, Haji Khalifa, a Turkish scholar, didn't actually complete that. So it wasn't until later, of course, a very important person, Fuad Sizkin. Now, yesterday, I wanted to just, I guess, take the time. This is completely out. Okay. This guy, Fuad Sizkin, German slash Turkish scholar. He died recently, by the way. Okay. He actually put in the effort to do what? To basically research and I guess bring about the exposure of what the Muslim scholars throughout history had invested in knowledge. So he actually went far in more and focused on geography, the Muslim knowledge in terms of geography and science in particular. So he actually did his own, look at this, he did his own, I guess, a museum in where just researching the Muslim science and knowledge and geography in particular. And he actually goes and comes across certain maps. And these maps were showing that Muslims had actually discovered America even before Christopher Columbus had discovered America, and that there was actually a map to prove how detailed and intricate the Muslim scholars and their knowledge about the world, how far it went and how far it extended. I know you might be thinking, well, why didn't they actually tell people about Islam there? We don't really know how far and what they had actually done. So this is his museum, and what were Muslims actually doing in terms of research, their knowledge about, I guess, the human anatomy, geography, astronomy, math, and certainly when we're talking about geography as well, that was a key thing because they considered, hey, for us to And this was the map that they had drawn, believe it or not. This was a map that they had drawn in 1420. Yes, they probably were way off in terms of what the map of America looked like, but this is how they were actually traveling. This is Africa, this is South America, and this is right there, and where this is their imagination in 1420, their imagination of what the map of the world looked like. I'm going to give you this. This is, you could say it was Ahmed Mansour, basically this journalist in Al Jazeera channel. And basically, here we go. Maybe you could look this up and listen to, I guess, the interview with Fuad Sizkeen and what he was doing. Yes, the interview is in Arabic. His Arabic is probably, I mean, his Arabic was great, but definitely you can see it's not his first language. He's putting a lot of effort to actually speak Arabic. But at the end, in where it's important to see these people and what efforts they were trying to, I guess, put in order to, I guess, preserve the Muslim identity. This is extremely important. Preserve the Muslim identity and even grow within our ilm about ourselves. And certainly preserve the Muslim identity is preserving the heritage and certainly preserving our future as well. And stick to our Iman and stick to our Islam. So I know I kind of went from East and West and all over the world, but that's the world I was in throughout all night yesterday. I'm jumping from Fuad
But
Siski.
it's cool to just learn about these different people and their contribution to the ummah.
Their contribution to the ummah and the amount of effort that they had invested in living with what truly matters. You know, you can have a lot of different things that might distract you. This is what truly matters. This ilm is what truly matters. I think I would say a lot of the college degrees that are today presented as, hey, this is what it means to get ilm, I think it really distracted us away from real talab al-ilm. And real talab al-ilm requires real work in knowing what these resources are, where these resources are, how to get to these resources of ilm, because real ilm is not in motivational speeches, but real ilm is basically in the hearts and the cores of those books. That's real ilm. Okay, those are the real ulama. To learn how to get to the light and the inspiration in those books, that's an advanced level. But if we're still struggling to even come in the library, come in and actually sit with the ulama. We're still wanting someone to always put in dinner and put in food and give us snacks and cappuccino in order to get ilm and to basically somehow encourage us to come in. Oh, we didn't even pass the kindergarten level. We're still looking for someone to constantly be at a kindergarten level where you could do it. I know you can. Come on. This is a kindergarten level. You're supposed to be way advanced, way more advanced in where whatever it takes, I'm going to learn Lugha Arabiya. Whatever it takes, I'm going to memorize my Quran. Whatever it takes, I'm going to basically listen to this boring lecture until this boring thing becomes my place of entertainment. That is what makes true ilm. That's what makes true ilm. That's what makes true talab al-ilm. We have to grow from our kindergarten level to the level where we really are living the commitment. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. I know we kind of didn't really do tafsir, the actual tafsir, but it was really important to at least get to know I would say, the inspiration of what we get from al-Qurtubi. So we went from speaking about Qurtubi to speaking about those that spoke about al-Qurtubi, Khairuddin Zirikli and Haji Khalifa, and certainly Fuad Siskeen, and of course, talking about Ibn al-Mundhir as well, other scholars that even, I guess, al-Qurtubi would often quote in order for us to learn when we're speaking about what it means to be part of a school. It basically means to learn how to go to the actual resources. That's it. Inshallah, this is going to give us into motivation and not necessarily lose the motivation. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. Any questions before we log off?
I would just say that I feel like I know what to be right
You know
now.
what to be? There
MashaAllah.
you go. Noura knows what to be right now. Noura, share it, Noura. I'd love to hear it.
No. I mean, it just it's inspirational. Alhamdulillah.
Yep, these people put in a lot of effort to actually be the scholars. It's about time that we go from elementary level to perhaps maybe what's after elementary, secondary, and then inshallah be the pioneers and those that will inshallah be the ones to deliver ilm, to get the ilm, live the ilm, and even compete in a positive competition. And of course, inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those that have the sincerity, because إنما الأعمال بالنيات. To really be a person of ilm is to really first consider that before you seek ilm, you recognize that you do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's number one. Number two is that what if I didn't have the sincerity? Don't stop. Remember, طلبنا العلم لغير الله فأبى العلم أن يكون إلا لله. That's what they used to say. We had seeked ilm for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What ilm refuses but to be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So don't stop. Even when you are seeking other than Allah, continue. Don't worry. Ilm will get you on track. Continue doing that ilm seeking and it will get you on track. And it will strengthen your deen. Don't stop. And this is it. And subhanakallah bihamdik nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. I guess we'll see it again. Alhamdulillah. And if there's anybody that would like to comment on anything, I'd be happy to hear it. I guess my friends are ready to go sleep.